Live now to Capitol Hill as leaders of the Army, Navy, Marines, and the Air Force testify before the Senate Armed Services Committee on budgetary concerns for the Pentagon and for member branches of the U.S. military. This is live coverage on C-SPAN 3.
Good morning. Senate Armed Services Committee meets this morning to receive testimony on the long-term budgetary challenges facing our military. I'd like to welcome our witnesses, the Chief of Staff of the Army, General Milley, the Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Richardson, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, General Neller, and the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, General Goldfein. Thank each of you for your years of distinguished service and for your testimony today. Far too often, Washington is governed by crisis and stopgap deals like continuing resolutions, omnibus spending bills, and episodic budget agreements that are a poor substitute for actually doing our jobs. It's become an unfortunately all too familiar cycle of partisan gridlock, political brinksmanship, and backroom dealing. Is it any wonder why Americans say they're losing trust in government? And through it all, we lose sight of the fact that the dysfunction of Washington has very real consequences for the thousands of Americans serving in uniform and sacrificing on our behalf all around the nation and the world. From Afghanistan to Iraq and Syria, from the heart of Europe to the seas of Asia, our troops are doing everything we ask of them. But we must ask ourselves, are we doing everything we can for them? Are we serving them with a similar degree of courage in the performance of our duties? The answer, I say with profound sadness, is we are not. We are not. Over many years, across presidents and congressional majorities of both parties, Washington has overseen a steady explosion of our national debt. This is just a fact. But 5 years ago, rather than confronting the real driver of our ballooning debt, which is the unsustainable growth of entitlement spending, we looked the other way. We failed to make tough choices and necessary reforms, and the result was the Budget Control Act, which imposed arbitrary caps on discretionary spending, including defense spending, for a decade. And when we failed to fix the real problem, we doubled down on these reckless cuts with mindless sequestration. In short, we lied to the American people. The Budget Control Act and sequestration have done nothing to fix our national debt. This is just mathematics. And what's worse, the people who have punished, we who have punished for our failure are none other than the men and women of our armed services and many other important agencies. The world has only grown more dangerous over the past 5 years, but the resources available to our military has continued to decline. This year's defense budget is more than $150 billion less than fiscal 2011. Rising threats and declining budgets have led to shrinking military forces that are struggling to sustain higher operational tempo with aging equipment and depleted readiness, and doing so at the expense of modernizing to deal with the threats of tomorrow. Our present crisis of military readiness is not just a matter of training. It's also a capacity problem. Our Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps are too small to train for and meet our growing operational requirements against low-end threats, while simultaneously have enough spare capacity to prepare for full-spectrum warfare against high-end threats. As it is, our services are cannibalizing themselves just to keep up with the current pace of deployments, as recent media reports about the Air Force and Marine Corps aviation have made clear. And the result is that our fighting forces are becoming effectively hollow against great power competitors. And if all of this is not bad enough, there's this. We're only halfway through the Budget Control Act. There are 5 more years of arbitrary defense spending caps. It is true that last year's Bipartisan Budget Act provided some much-needed relief. But this 2-year deal is coming to an end. And when it does, those arbitrary caps will come return and remain in place through the next president's entire first term. The Department of Defense and many of us in the Congress believe this would devastate our national defense, and yet we are fooling ourselves and deceiving the American people about the true cost of fixing the problem. Just consider, the Department's current 5-year defense plan is $100 billion in total above the spending cap set by the Budget Control Act. In addition, roughly $30 billion of annual spending for base defense requirements is buried in the budget account for emergency operations, requirements that will remain for our military even if our present operations immediately ended, which of course they won't. What this means is that over the next 5 years, our nation must come up with $250 billion just to pay for our current defense strategy and our current programs of record. $250 billion just to do what we're planning to do right now, which I think many of us would agree is insufficient to meet our present, let alone our future challenges. $250 billion, that is the real hidden cost above our budget caps that we must come up with over the next 5 years. Put simply, we have no plan as yet to pay for what our Department of Defense is doing right now, even as most of us agree that what we're doing at present is not sufficient for what we really need. And those needs are great indeed, from maintaining the capability and capacity to wage a generational fight against radical Islamic terrorism, to rebuilding a ready and modernized force to deter and, if necessary, defeat high-end threats, to modernizing our nuclear deterrent, to investing in the next generation capabilities that will preserve our military technological advantage and ensure our troops never find themselves in a fair fight. The bottom line is this: from the Budget Control Act caps to the so-called OCO account, to our increasingly obsolete defense strategy, to the modernization bow wave that is coming for each of the services, we are lying to ourselves and the American people about the true cost of defending the nation. The result is that our military's ability to deter conflict is weakening, and should we find ourselves in conflict, it is becoming increasingly likely that our nation will deploy young Americans into battle without sufficient training or equipment to fight a war that will take longer, be larger, cost more, and ultimately claim more American lives than it otherwise would have. And if that comes to pass, who will be responsible? Who is to blame for the increasing risk to the lives of the men and women who volunteer to serve and defend our nation? The answer is clear. We are. The President and the Congress, Democrats and Republicans, all of us. With budget debates looming ahead, the question now is whether we'll find the courage we've lacked for 5 long years, the courage to put aside politics, to chart a better course, to adopt a defense budget worthy of the service and sacrifice of those who volunteer to put themselves in harm's way on our behalf. I'm committed to doing everything I can as chairman of this committee to accomplishing this task. I know my colleagues on this committee are too, and despite the odds, I am ever hopeful that together we still can. Senator Reid.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me join you in welcoming the members of the panel and thank them for their outstanding service to the nation and ask them to convey our thanks to the men and women who serve so proudly in uniform for the United States. Thank you. The focus of today's hearing is the long-term budget challenges confronting our military services. For 15 years, our armed forces have been in continuous military operations. While our men and women in uniform have performed their duties superbly and doing all that we've asked them to do and more, the intense operational tempo has had an impact on our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, their training, and their equipment. On top of all that, the services have had to grapple with sequestration and constrained budgets, as the Chairman has pointed out. The military leaders before us today have an important task. As they plan their budgets for fiscal year 2018 and beyond, they must anticipate emerging threats for the future and how our military will address and ultimately defeat those threats. As we are reminded on a daily basis, our country is facing many complicated and rapidly evolving challenges that do not offer easy or quick solutions. For example, we have seen our near-peer competitors learn from our past successes and make advancements of their own, particularly in the areas of precision and long-range strike, anti-access/area denial, space, and cyber. As a result, the Department of Defense has embarked on a third offset strategy to address the steady erosion of U.S. technological superiority and recapture our qualitative advantage over our adversaries. I would welcome our witnesses' thoughts on how their respective services plan to confront these critical issues, again in the context of these very difficult budgetary issues. In addition to anticipating and planning our future threats, our witnesses today must also ensure Targeted investments are made to rebuild readiness levels, modernize the force, and maintain the well-being of our troops. Over the course of this year, the committee has repeatedly heard testimony on these issues, and I hope that our witnesses can provide this committee an update on the progress that they have made. Finally, defense budget should be based on our long-term military strategy, which requires the Department to focus at least 5 years into the future. Last year, Congress passed the 2015 Bipartisan Budget Act that established the discretionary funding level for defense spending for fiscal year 2016 and 2017. And while the BBA provided the Department with budget stability in the near term, there is no agreement for fiscal 2018 and beyond. Therefore, without another bipartisan agreement that provides relief from sequestration, the military service will be forced to submit a fiscal year 2018 budget that adheres to the sequestration level budget cap and would undermine the investments made to rebuild readiness and modernization and other aspects of our military force. Not only is the issue one of budgets, but the issue is one of the certainty of knowing that you have budget levels not just for a year, but for at least 5 years. That's another aspect we have to come to grip with. I will welcome the witnesses' thoughts and suggestions as we move forward. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
General Milley.
Thanks, Chairman McCain. Appreciate that. And Ranking Member Reed and other distinguished members of the committee for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss our Army. And thank you for your consistent support and commitment to our Army soldiers, civilians, and families. A ready Army, as you know, is manned, trained, equipped, and well-led as the foundation of the joint force in order to deter and, if deterrence fails, to fight and defeat a wide range of state and non-state actors today, tomorrow, and deep into the future. Although there's many challenges, as I outlined below, the most important of which is consistent, sustained, and predictable funding over time, I still want to be clear. The United States Army is America's combat force of decision, and we are more capable, better trained, better equipped, better led, and more lethal than any other ground force in the world today. We are highly valued by our allies, and we're feared by our enemies. And they enemies know full well we can destroy them, we can destroy any enemy, we can destroy them anywhere, and we can destroy them anytime. But having said that, our challenge today is to sustain the counter-terrorist and the counterinsurgency capabilities that we have developed to a high degree of proficiency over the last 15 consecutive years of war for many years in the future, prediction of which is unknown, and simultaneously rebuild our capability in ground combat against higher-end, near-peer, great power threats. The Army prioritizes readiness in this NDAA because the global security environment is increasingly uncertain and complex, and I anticipate that we will have to continue to prioritize readiness for many years to come. While we cannot forecast precisely when and where the next contingency will arise, it is my professional military view that if any contingency happens, it will likely require a significant commitment of U.S. Army forces on the ground. The Army is currently committed to winning our fight against radical terrorists and deterring conflict in other parts of the globe. Currently, the Army provides 52% of all the global combatant commander demand for military forces, and we provide 69% of all the emerging combatant commander demand, and currently we have 187,000 soldiers committed in 140 different countries globally conducting the nation's business. To sustain current operations at that rate and to mitigate the risks of deploying an unready force into future combat operations, the Army will continue to prioritize and fully fund readiness over end-strength modernization and infrastructure. In other words, we are mortgaging future readiness for current readiness. We request the resources to fully man and equip our combat formations and conduct realistic combined arms combat training at both home station and our combat training centers. We request continued support for our modernization in 5 key capability areas that we determined are lagging: aviation, command and control networks, integrated air and missile defense, combat vehicles, and emerging threat programs. Our near-term innovation efforts are focused on developing overmatch in mobility, lethality, mission command, and force protection, with specific emphasis on the following systems: long-range precision fires, missile defense, directed energy weapons, ground vehicles, vertical lift, cyber, electronic warfare, robotics, networks, and active protective systems for both ground and air. And we ask your continued support for our soldiers and our families to recruit and retain the high level and the high quality of soldiers of character and competence that you have come to expect from the United States Army. With your support through sustained, long-term, balanced, predictable resources, the Army will fund readiness at sufficient levels to meet current demands, build readiness for contingencies, and invest in the readiness of our future force. Thank you, Senators, for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to your questions.
Admiral Richardson.
Morning, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Reed, distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today, and thank you for your sustained support to our Navy and our nation. I've been traveling around a fair amount recently to put eyes on to our Navy around the world. And as you know, the problems they face are getting more complex by the day. But your naval team is working hard, and our sailors, Marines, and civilians are simply astounding in their skill and dedication. We must focus on them with everything we do to respect their mission and their dedication. I can describe our current challenges in terms of a triple whammy. The first whammy, as we've said, is the continued high demand for our forces, our naval forces. We just marked the 15th anniversary of 9/11. And the past 15 years of high up-tempo in support of the wars has put tremendous wear and tear on our ships and aircraft. It's also taken a toll on the sailors that take those platforms out to sea, on the skilled Navy civilians that build and repair them, and on our family members. The second whammy is budget uncertainty. 8 years of continuing resolutions, including a year of sequestration, have driven additional cost and time into just about everything that we do. The services are essentially operating in 3 fiscal quarters per year now. Nobody schedules anything important in the first quarter. The disruptions that this uncertainty imposes translates directly into risks to our Navy and our nation. The third whammy is the resource levels in the Budget Control and Bipartisan Budget Acts. Funding levels require us to prioritize achieving full readiness only for our deploying units. These are ready for full spectrum operations, but we are compromising the readiness of those ships and aircraft that we will have to surge to achieve victory in a large conflict. And we have also curtailed our modernization in a number of areas critical to staying ahead of our potential adversaries. One more related point, Mr. Chairman, this highlights a point you brought up. Your Navy thrives on long-term stability. When putting together shipbuilding plans, it's necessary to think in terms of decades. And while I know we're mostly here to talk about the current challenges, I must say I was struck by the recent Congressional Budget Office report updating their long-term budget and economic outlook. In it, they predict that within the decade, discretionary spending, which includes defense, will drop to the lowest levels in more than 50 years. It makes crystal clear that it is vital that we all dive in and get to work on this problem now for the security of our country. In terms of a solution, we must work as partners. On one hand, we must work to set sufficient resource levels and restore stability to the budgeting process. And on the other hand, I must ensure that every dollar that the American taxpayer gives the Navy is spent as efficiently and effectively as possible. I'm committed to meeting my responsibilities here and in partnering with you as we go forward. Together with our sister services, your Navy is here to protect our great nation. Your sailors and civilians continue to do everything that is being asked of them, even as the demands continue to grow. Working together with you, I'm committed to finding a way to address these challenges. Thank you, sir, and I look forward to your questions.
General Neller.
Chairman McCain, Ranking Member Reed, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear today and talk about your Marines. And I thank you for your support of Marines, sailors that serve with Marines, our civilian Marines, and our families. Marines have a unique perspective on readiness based on the intent of Congress. We are the nation's force in readiness, and being ready is central to our identity as part of the Navy Marine Corps team. That said, Mr. Chairman, my understanding of the purpose of this hearing is for the service chiefs to provide our best military advice on our current and future readiness challenges. My experience in the Marine Corps has been to make do with what we've been given. That's just the way I was raised. And I've never really been comfortable asking for anything more. And I also understand there are many competing fiscal requirements that this Congress has to deal with. However, based on the current top line and the future budget projections, and though we are meeting our current requirements, I believe we're now pushing risk in the long-term health of the force into the future. As an example, we submitted an unfunded priority list of approximately $2.6 billion, which is the largest we've ever submitted. The global security environment drives our requirements, and requirements equal commitments. Your Marines are as busy and as committed now as during the height of operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. Current op tempo, balanced against fiscal reductions, instability of continuing resolutions, and the threat of sequestration during the past few years have driven us to critically review the allocation of our resources in order to meet these commitments. We, like the other services, make tough choices every day, and we're facing our readiness challenges head on. Our readiness priority has been deployed and next to deploy units. Current readiness shortfalls in aviation, facility sustainment, future modernization, retention of critical skills, and building the depth on our ready bench forces at home are our primary concerns. That said, we have not stood idly by in planning for our future. I'm confident we have identified our requirements for readiness recovery and improvements, and we are making progress, slowly, but progress nonetheless. Our Force 2025 initiative is identifying the requirements of our future Marine Corps balanced against fiscal reality. Force 2025 addresses current capability shortfalls, sustainment of capacity, and future manpower requirements to fight on the 21st century battlefield. Fiscal constraints necessarily bring trade-offs, and to paraphrase one of my predecessors, we will give you the most ready Marine Corps the nation can afford. The Marine Corps will remain good stewards of what we are given, and we will generate the maximum readiness possible with the resources we are provided. And we will create and generate a Marine Corps that is agile, ready, and lethal. Working side by side with Congress, the other services, and our Navy shipmates especially, you can count on your Marines to meet and exceed the standards the American people have set for us. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, General. General Goldfein.
Thank you, Chairman McCain, Ranking Member Reed, and distinguished members of the committee. It's an honor to be here and to be a member of this JCS team. Serving besides men I have known for years, fought with, and admire. In the interest of brevity, Chairman, you and Ranking Member Reed asked 5 key questions in your letter to us requesting this hearing. You asked, what are the Air Force's modernization needs? We need to maintain stable, predictable funding for the F-35, the KC-46, and the B-21 in order to outpace our adversaries. At the same time, shoulder to shoulder with the Navy, we must modernize our aging nuclear enterprise. And while we continue to extend the life of our existing fleets, we need the flexibility to retire aging weapon systems and reduce excess infrastructure in order to afford the technology needed to maintain our advantage, given adversary advancements in satellite-enabled precision, stealth, cruise and ballistic missiles, ISR, and other anti-access area denial capabilities that continue to proliferate worldwide. You asked, how will the Air Force regain full spectrum readiness? It starts with people. Our bipartisan budget act end strength totals as 492,000 airmen for FY17, 317,000 of which are active duty. Based upon current and projected global demands for air power to deter and, if required, defeat challenges presented by China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and violent extremism, we respectfully request your support to grow our force to 321,000 active duty airmen by the end of FY17. This remains our top priority in the current budget request. You asked, how will the Air Force maintain its technological edge? We're laser focused on fighter, tanker, and bomber recapitalization, nuclear modernization, preparing for a war that could extend into space, increasing our capability and capacity in the cyber domain, and leveraging and improving multi-domain and coalition-friendly command and control as the foundation of future combined arms operation. You asked, how will your requirements impact the budgetary top line from fiscal year 2018 onward? We'll be forced to continually make strategic trades to simultaneously sustain legacy fleets engaged in the current fight, while smartly investing in modernization and the future technologies that will be required to meet combatant commander demands in the information age of warfare. Repealing sequestration, returning to stable budgets without extended continuing resolutions, and allowing us the flexibility to reduce excess infrastructure and make strategic trades are essential to success. Finally, you asked, what solutions are available for mitigating growing costs, such as new acquisition authorities or innovative solutions to maintaining our military? As the Chief Requirements Officer, I review every major program to ensure requirements are clearly published and sustained throughout the program, and by personally signing documents leading to milestone A and B decisions to ensure we meet cost, schedule, and performance standards for our warfighting commanders. Additionally, we aligned our continuous process improvement efforts with DoD's Better Buying Power 3.0 initiatives, as well as Secretary James bending the cost curve activities. In summary, all of our portfolios depend on steady, predictable, and timely funding, and the flexibility to make key trades to balance capability, capacity, and readiness. Current global security demands remind us that America's joint team must be ready to engage anytime, anywhere, across the full spectrum of conflict, all while defending the homeland and providing a safe, secure, and reliable strategic nuclear deterrent. America expects it, combatant commanders require it, and with your support, our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines will continue to deliver it. We look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Thank the witnesses, and thank you for your leadership and service to the nation. I think we would all agree that the world has changed a lot since the initiation of sequestration. A simple question, do you feel that we can adequately, you would have the resources and ability to defend this nation against present and future threats if we continue down this path of sequestration, beginning with you, General Milley?
Under sequestration, no, sir, I do not.
Admiral Richardson?
I agree with General Milley, sir. Sequestration will prevent us from doing that.
General Neller?
No, sir, we would not have the capability.
General
Yes,
Golfin?
Same.
Thank you. Admiral Richardson, you talk about in your statement, written statement, our people are feeling the strain. We continue to meet our recruiting and retention goals, but you go on to talk about SEALs, you begin to talk about surface nuclear officers not meeting the goals. Naval aviation is another area of concern. We see declines in officer retention for multiple grades, and bonuses are not proving fully effective. I guess I would ask Admiral Richardson, General Neller, and General Golfin, it's not a matter of money with these young pilots. Isn't that true? That it's a matter of being able to fly and to operate and to, I mean, when we just talk about solving this problem with bonuses, you know, we're never going to compete with the airlines because they can always up the ante. But when our pilots are flying less hours a month than Russian and Chinese pilots are, you're going to have a problem. I'll begin with you, Admiral Richardson.
Sir, I agree with you that our pilots join the Navy to fly naval aircraft, and that's what they want to do. This is a much bigger problem than money. Money can help up to a point. We want to make sure we adequately compensate all of our people. And there is competition, as you say, but at the heart of the matter, this is a highly dedicated team that wants to defend the nation in high-performance aircraft, and that's what they want to do. They want to fly.
General Neller.
Sir, I would agree with that on paper, our situation looks a little bit better, but it doesn't take into account the experience level of those aircrew. But it is all about the best retention thing we can do is provide modern, maintainable, ready-to-fly airplanes. But I'd also say it's more than just the aircrew, it's also the maintainers. And we're making it now on the backs of those sergeants and those staff sergeants out there that have to do work twice and to get the part from one to put it on the other. And so I'm as concerned about maintainers sticking around, and as we go to depots, we compete not just with airlines for aircrew, but we compete with contractors and commercial concerns for the Marines that maintain our airplanes.
And you, while I've still got you, in your written statement, you said the Marine Corps is no longer in a position to generate current readiness and reset our equipment while sustaining our facilities and modernizing to ensure our future readiness. It's a pretty strong statement, General.
Based on the current fiscal environment, we, as was stated, I believe, by all my fellow chiefs, we're all making trades. And those trades require us to accept risk in certain areas. I would like to have our parts support when you look at the aviation particularly, but I could say the same thing about ground equipment. The amount of money we're able to put against parts and supply support is not what we need to maintain our legacy aircraft.
General Goldfein.
Sir, I approach this as a balanced challenge and opportunity, quality of service and quality of life. Removing financial burdens through aviation bonus is certainly fall in the quality of life category. But what we've found in the past, and we've been through this before because airlines have hired before, is that's quality of service is as important as quality of life. And quality of service is making sure that you're given the opportunity to be the best you can be in your design, in your chosen occupation. Pilots who don't fly, maintainers who don't maintain, controllers who don't control will walk. And there's not enough money in the Treasury to keep them in if we don't give them the resources they need to be the best they can be. In my mind, readiness and morale are inextricably linked. Where we have high readiness, we tend to have high morale because they're given the opportunities to compete. Where we have low readiness, we have our lowest morale.
General Milley, in your statement, written statement, you said, our goal is to have regular Army brigade combat teams achieve 60 to 60% full spectrum readiness, and I estimate that it will take the Army approximately 4 years to achieve that, assuming no significant increase in demand and no sequestration levels of funding. That's a pretty alarming statement when you look at the challenges, the potential challenges that we are facing. You want to elaborate on that a bit?
Thanks, sir. For 15 consecutive years, the Army's been decisively committed to Iraq and Afghanistan and other counter-terrorist, counter-insurgency type operations. In order to do that, we essentially came off of a core warfighting skills of combined arms maneuver against a near-peer or higher-end threat. So, for example, just a couple of examples, an armor officer today, a tank officer, up through, say, the rank of major, has very little experience in terms of maneuvering tanks against an opponent who has armor. Very little experience in gunnery. Artillery battalions have not fired battalion-level fires consistently in a decade and a half. So we have to rebuild that, and that's going to take considerable time, effort on our part. We've made a lot of progress, by the way, in the last year.
And you can't do it with sequestration?
Oh, absolutely not. Sequestration will take the rug out from underneath us. Absolutely.
Well, I'd just like to say, before I turn to Senator Reid, that at your confirmation hearings, I asked you to come to before this committee and give us your frank and honest view. I appreciate the testimony here today, and I think it will be very helpful in our efforts to eliminate the effect of sequestration and give you the wherewithal that you need to make sure that we meet the challenges, which are, as I said in the beginning, far more significant than they were on the day that sequestration began. We've got a lot of issues, but I appreciate the fact that you have outlined for this committee, and I hope for the American people, the necessity of us addressing these challenges. I thank the witnesses. Senator Reid.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Again, thank you, gentlemen, for your testimony. It's very insightful, very sobering, and also reinforces the point that the Chairman made that we just have to move away from sequestration. And one of the issues that has been illustrated by your testimony is not just the limits on spending, it's the uncertainty. Admiral Richardson, you pointed out that you only operate really 3/4 of a year, that 1/4 is just sort of standing around wishing and hoping. Is that, can you elaborate a bit?
Well, sir, behaviors have modified to adapt to the reality of the last 8 years, and so big programs that require new funding, that require authorities for new starts, those are all prohibited in a continuing resolution environment. And so rather than, put those programs in the first quarter and put them all at risk, we just live in a 3/4 year, and that first quarter is a light touch on just trying to keep things going.
Let me, General Milley and then General Goldfein, your comments too about this uncertainty factor. In fact, one could argue, and get your insight, that effectively you're losing lots of money and wasting lots of money because of this uncertainty, not saving anything because of sequestration. Is that clear?
That's correct, Senator, because if all we're doing is planning things year to year, or actually 3/4 of a year to 3/4 of a year, things like multi-year contracts, developing long-term relationships with industry where they can count on us and so on, that becomes very difficult. And what ends up happening is the price per unit goes up, so it's built-in inefficiency, it's built-in cost overruns. It's an ungood situation. It's not good, and it needs to end.
General Miller, your comments?
It's very much the same, Senator. I mean, we've got some major programs, and we would like to have the certainty and to be able to tell the vendor that they got the funding there, and we can press them to drive the cost down. If we live year to year or month to month, that's not going to happen. But in line with what General Goldfein said, I think the force out there, they're watching us, they're looking at us, and they want to know what the plan is. And people, for all of us, are our center of gravity. That's the one thing we have to protect. We can buy all the planes and ships and tanks and vehicles we want, but we've got to keep, this is a volunteer force. This is a recruited and retained force. And they watch everything that's going on. These young men and women are very smart, and they want to know that there's commitment that they can count on as they decide whether they're going to continue to stay in.
Thank you, sir. General Goldfein.
Thanks, sir. Just perhaps to add some perspective, if we end up in a long-term continuing resolution, this will be the 8th that we've had to deal with. So just to give you a scale then for what will happen to the United States Air Force if we go beyond 3 months into a long-term CR. That'll be about $1.3 billion less that's in the FY17 budget. Some immediate impacts. KC-46 will go from 15 to 12 aircraft. We'll be procuring munitions at the FY16 rates. In the FY17 budget, we were actually able to forecast based on what we believe we will be dropping in the current fight. That will go away, and so we'll be procuring preferred munitions at a lower rate, which not only affects us, all of us, that are engaged in the campaign, but it also affects our coalition partners who are relying on us as well for preferred munitions. We'll have 60 acquisition programs that will be affected, and 50 MILCON projects, to include those that are new mission bed down, will also be affected. That just by a long-term CR.
Thank you. One of the issues that you all discussed is, and the Chairman has made, I think, appropriate reference to, is a changing situation in terms of unexpected challenges in the last several years. My sense, too, is that as we look around, particularly from technology, you're beginning to discover unanticipated costs for legacy systems, in addition, that we might not even have added into the projection. Is that fair to say, General Goldfein, and then we'll go down the panel?
Yes, sir. What happens is we do what we call a Service Life Extension Program, or SLIP, and there's actually a reason it's a 4-letter word, because what we do is we put an aircraft and we shake it, and we put it through all kinds of environmental testings, and then we find out what those failure parts are, and then we either buy those parts or we put them in the bench stock, and we try to predict what we will need, and then we certify that aircraft will fly to the next 2,000 hours. The reality is we only fix what we can accurately predict. And then when we put these aircraft into depot maintenance, we pull the skin off. What we find are there are things that are breaking that we'd never predicted. Classic example, F-15C has a nose wheel steering problem, and we go look for the part, and we haven't made that part in 5 years. And so then we got to industry, and we found that we've got to hand make now a part that we haven't made in years, and that just causes the costs to go up. So what we found over the years is that older aircraft, it's actually not a linear path in terms of cost growth. It actually gets at some point to an exponential growth. And then that cost per flying hour requires us to put more money into sustaining systems longer than putting that money into the modernization, which we desperately need.
Thank you. My time has expired. Thank you, gentlemen, again for your service. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, General Milley, when you were talking about ground troops, I'm reminded of my last year in the House. I was on the House Armed Services Committee. It's 1994, when we had an expert witness sitting out there, like you guys are, saying in 10 years we no longer need ground troops. And you know, I think so often about what our needs are going to be in the future and how we're trying to survive today, and yet looking at into the future. Yeah, you talk about the KC-46 and the need. The KC-135 has been around for 57 years, and it's going to be around for a lot longer. And this is not what the other side of the competition does. I think the chairman's right when he says that, you know, he asked for your honest opinion. And I don't have, and we don't have the credibility to go out to the public and adequately explain the level of risk that we're accepting today and the fact that we're in the most threatened position, in my opinion, we've ever been. Now, they depend on hearing that from you, not from people like me. When General Dempsey said, and this is some time ago, he said, we're putting our military on a path where the force is so degraded and so unready that it would be immoral to use force. Now, that, to me, was a courageous statement that I've used, and people they're shocked when they hear it. This is some time ago now. Winfield, he made the statement, there could be, for the first time in my career, instances where we'd be asked to respond to a crisis, and we'll have to say that we cannot. You know, that's a shocker. And then, of course, when our former colleague, Chuck Hagel, said, American dominance of the seas, in the skies, and in space can no longer be taken for granted. Anyway, what I'm saying is that you folks need to be outspoken. You need to be heard because you're the experts. And the public is not aware of the threats that we have. So I'm going to ask you in a minute a question just on the size of the military, but let me give you a couple of, these are quotes from you and other people talking about just the size. General Goldfein, you said our strategic capability advantage over competitors is shrinking and our ability to protect strategic deterrence is being challenged. Your predecessor, General Welsh, said virtually every mission area faces critical manning shortages, and the Air Force risks burning airmen out. General Milley said in light of the threats confronting our nation, to include Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, ISIS, you know, we need to talk about that. The Army has accepted high military risk to meet the requirements of the National Security Strategy. The General Allen, at today's end strength, the Army risks consuming readiness as fast as it builds it. So I'd like to ask each one of you to do the realities of the strategic environment today and the foreseeable future call for a change in the size of our military. To start with you, General Milley.
Thank you, Senator. I think the Army has got adequate readiness and adequate size to deal with our current demand, which is fighting terrorists, counterinsurgency operations in Iraq, Afghanistan, elsewhere around the world, and to meet the current global combatant commander demand for day-to-day operation.
Now you're saying that the current end strength or that which is projected?
The day-to-day, what's going on today, the national military strategy, given that we're actively engaged against ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and other groups.
Okay.
So that's current. The risk comes if we have a conflict with a near-peer, high-end competitor. Those other contingencies that Secretary of Defense Carter and many others have talked about with China, Russia, North Korea, or Iran. Each of which is different operationally and tactically, each of which would require different levels of forces, types of forces, and methods of operation. But the bottom line is, with the size of the U.S. Army today, if one or more of those other contingencies took place, I maintain that our risk would significantly increase, as I mentioned before. And if two of them happen at the same time, I think it's high risk for the nation.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, I understand. Of course, that is not predictable. We don't know what it's going to be.
But we have to be prepared for it. And just one last comment, you know, what we want is to deter. Nobody wants to have these wars with near-peer competitors, high, great powers.
Okay.
And the only thing more expensive than deterrence is actually fighting a war. And the only thing more expensive than fighting a war is fighting one and losing one. Yeah. This stuff's expensive. We're expensive. We recognize that. But the bottom line is it's an investment that is worth every nickel.
Good statement. Briefly, Admiral Richardson, size?
Sir, philosophically, I couldn't say it any better than General Milley did.
Okay.
I agree with them. In terms of the size, we're asking the same question. When I first came in to be the CNO, our current fleet size, and there's more to capability than size, but size does matter, is 308 ships. That assessment was done without considering the emergent threat of Russia, without considering the emergent threat of ISIS. We are completing a study this month that gets at a new force structure assessment, and we'll be ready to bring that to you very shortly.
Yeah.
But
you two generally agree with that?
I think it's two things, Senator. First, it's the capacity and the size that you talked about, but it's also, I think was mentioned by everybody else, is the capability sets that we have now. The future fight, if there is one, hopefully there isn't, but to deter a future fight, there are capabilities that we don't in the Marine Corps have that we're going to require because we focused on the fight against terrorism the last 15 years. So how big is that force?
Yeah.
What do you do? Because if otherwise you have to trade, because there are capabilities we have now that we don't want to get rid of. So as you trade one capability for another, you either give something up and you accept risk there to get the other capability, and those are the trades that we're in and discussing at this time.
That's right, and you have to accept risk. I know that there's not time for you to answer that question, but I do have another comment to make concerning you, General Foldstein. I agree with the fact, and I talked to the pilots, they want to fly more. That is significant. You can't completely eliminate the fact that it costs $9 million if you take someone off the street and make an F-22 pilot out of them, and yet the bonuses, you're talking about, what, $25,000 a year. That has to be considered also, I would say.
Sir, in terms of the fact that we're moving forward for an aviation bonus, I'm not sure. I'll just make it.
Yeah, you have to consider that too, along with the flying hours, because the expense of taking someone and putting in advanced Air Force training and then taking them all the way up to F-22 capability.
Oh, yes, sir. And as a matter of fact, our studies that we've done show that, we haven't adjusted the aviation bonus for a number of years.
That's right.
And so we're asking for Congress's support to give us authorization for a higher level based on the data that we have that shows that it will take more than what we're offered today to be able to provide the quality of life incentives to be able to allow them to stay in. But at the same time, I will tell you, I'm laser focused on the quality of service aspect of this, because even if I pay them more, if I don't get them in the air, they're going to walk.
You're right. You're right. Thank you.
On behalf of the Chairman, Senator McCaskill.
Thank you. I want to associate myself with the opening statement of Senator McCain in many ways, because I think you all honestly step forward and lead an amazing fighting force. I think we owe the American people honesty about the military budget. And what is going on in the House of Representatives this year is once again a phony budget gimmick to pretend that they are somehow being fiscally conservative because they are using the Overseas Contingency Operations Fund to fund the base operations of our military. That is dishonest on its face. It is inefficient and ineffective for our military. And General Miley, I would like to bring this home to my state. Obviously, we have Fort Leonard Wood, that has dates back to World War II in terms of some of its buildings, and we have temporary military construction dating back to that time, and we are in a aggressive updating of that facility, which is such a key facility for our Army. And I noticed that they even had the nerve to put military construction activities at bases in the United States in the Overseas Contingency Operating Fund. Can you comment about how this impacts your ability on readiness and training when you are being put in a fund that is year to year and not certain and you can't plan with it?
Sure, Senator. I mean, you're exactly right. You can't plan with it, and you can't just go year to year. And things like multi-year contracts and having relationships with commercial industry in order to upgrade either weapons, equipment, et cetera. Specifically, what you're talking about is infrastructure, which is a key component. We often talk about man, train, equip sort of thing, but also the infrastructure on Army bases is atrophying. The training ranges are not as modern as they should be. Throughput capacities and so on. And we've got a laundry list of detailed, it's not just in Missouri, it's in many other places. That's of great concern, and we've been robbing that account for quite a few years now in order maintain readiness or to pay for the war. So that's another area of great concern, is that infrastructure.
And our men and women that have been deployed, they're not deployed for half a year, so we certainly shouldn't fund their money for half a year. General Goldfein, I also had an opportunity to go to 139th Airlift Wing over the last few weeks. And, you know, it is the top gun of airlift in terms of training. And the frustration there is there seems to be a disconnect, and only you and people that you interact with can fix this. And that is, these are strategic level courses. We're training people from all over the country at this facility in terms of lift, and internationally, I might add, our allies, as you probably well know. But for some reason, they are having to deal with an annual funding issue instead of getting programmatic funding. I don't get that. I don't get why the National Guard Bureau and the Air Mobility Command cannot get together, because you know what they're both doing? They're doing this. One is saying, oh, we're putting it programmatic, and the other one's saying, well, we don't have it. And it's really frustrating for that excellent facility to have to continue to beat on this door and have nobody answer. And I would like your commitment today to look into this and see if you can't get this resolved once and for all.
Yes, ma'am, and I'll just tell you quickly that we had this come also up in the remotely piloted aircraft business. And what we found was that because there are so many elements associated with actually getting a cap airborne and doing a sortie, that we hadn't gone through and done the work that built the requirements that lay out over an entire year. And so the wing commanders were having to plug holes and go month to month to month. So as a result of that, we put together a team, and now we're actually working with the director of the Air National Guard to lay out annual requirements for the MPA days. And then once we have those annual requirements, then we're going to fund them on an annual basis, so the wing commanders won't be there. So I'll take this on and make sure that would be terrific. Is doing it.
And finally, for you, General Neller, I'm a big, big fan of the Marines. But I was struck when I was at Fort Leonard Wood. I had a chance to visit with recruits who were in the last 2 weeks of their training. They'd done 9 weeks. They were in their AIT training. And I had a chance to visit with these men and women. I was struck how many immigrants were in this training class from South Korea, Honduras, Costa Rica. They had just done a naturalization ceremony on the base for 67 soldiers becoming United States citizens. These people are saying they want to cross the line and die for their country. When I saw the way that the Muslim soldier was treated in Parris Island, it hurt my heart. And I just wanted on the record for you to commit that you will get to the bottom of this, and there will be no question in the Marines that abusing someone because of their ethnicity or their religion is absolutely unacceptable, or their gender orientation.
Senator, you have my complete and total commitment to that.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
On behalf of Chairman McCain, Senator Fisher, please.
Thank you, Senator Reid. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here today. I'm going to pick up a little bit on Senator McCaskill's expression of frustration and expand that. Many times the American people, they hear different stories, different information from different sources, and I would like to highlight part of that today and get your response to that, and if you would clarify it. General Milley, the Wall Street Journal published an article by General Petraeus last month, and it was entitled, "The Myth of a U.S. Military Readiness Crisis." And in it, he characterized the Army's weapons inventory in the following way. While some categories of aircraft and other key weapons are aging and will need replacement or major refurbishment soon, most equipment remains in fairly good shape. According to our sources in the military, Army equipment has on average mission-capable rates today exceeding 90%, and that is a historically high level. General, do you believe that General Petraeus was correct in this assessment that the equipment and the mission-capable rates are what he says they are? And what does that tell us, or possibly what does it not tell us about the state of the Army?
Thanks, Senator. And I've got, I know General Petraeus well and got a lot of respect from served under him, et cetera, and along with Mr. O'Hanlon, who was the co-author. Both of them are very talented, but
As you might expect, I don't necessarily agree with that. The readiness issue, you know, the title of the article is Readiness Crisis a Myth. I don't know if crisis is the right word. That's packed with all kinds of emotion. But there are serious readiness challenges in the United States Army today. And the operational readiness rates for our key weapon systems are not above 90%. They are well below 90% in some cases. And that's cause for great concern. They're improving, but they're below 90%. 90% is the standard. 9 out of 10 weapon systems ready to go to war at a moment in time. Our weapon systems are not in that condition at this time.
Thank you, sir, for clarifying that. Also, the column goes on to argue that training for full-spectrum operations is resuming. It claims that by 2017, the Army plans to rotate nearly 20 brigades, about a third of its force, through national training centers each year. The Marine Corps plans to put 12 infantry battalions, about half its force, through large training exercises, and the Air Force is funding its training and readiness programs at 80 to 98% of what it considers fully resourced levels. Generals, do you think that accurately portrays your services and their readiness to conduct the full spectrum operations? General Milley.
It's a partial answer. So with the flagship training event for an Army unit, an Army brigade combat team is going to a combat training center at the National Training Center or Joint Readiness Training Center in Denton, Louisiana. And a few years ago, we were not doing decisive action operations against higher-end threats. We changed gears about 24 months ago, and about 12 months ago, 12 to 18 months ago, we started putting brigades through the paces of going against near-peer competitors unless they were specifically designated to go into Afghanistan or Iraq. At the end of FY17, by the end of next year, 100% of our brigade combat teams on active duty will have one rotation. It's all about reps. So if you were, back in the day, pre-911, a typical battalion commander or a major, for example, or a company commander, he would have 3, 4, 5, maybe more rotations through a training center by the time they reach those levels. Today, we have an entire generation of officers who's going into the field grade ranks, commanding battalions, or even in some cases companies that are not have very little or no experience at a CTC. So by the end of FY17, 100% of the brigades, but it's a matter of reps. We have to do it over and over again. So the data I have and the forecast we have is by the end of 18, 24 months from now, we'll have 9 of our brigades with 3 rotations, 18 of them with 2, and 4 with 1. That's not bad. It's better, and all that's good, but there's more to it than just going to the training centers. That's a key part, but there's more to it. Manning levels are holding us back. We have over 30,000 non-available soldiers in the regular Army today. That's a corps. An entire corps are not available for medical, legal, and a variety of other reasons. And that's not even talking about your training account, basic training, or the overhead it takes to run basic training. So your personnel piece is big, and then equipment maintenance, which you just talked about with OR rates. Those are big. Those are all parts of readiness. And that's just readiness with the equipment, the modernization, the systems we have today. 5 or 10 years from now, there's lots of systems out there that we need to invest in to get them online to be able to deal with a near-peer great power, if in fact that day ever comes. So I don't subscribe 100% to what General Petraeus, as much as I respect him, or Michael Hanlon wrote, and I like them both.
Okay, thank you. I am out of time, but General Neller and General Goldfein, if you could get that information to me, I would be happy to put that out. And I too respect the service that General Petraeus has given to this country, but I think it's important that we get correct information out to the people of this country so they understand the situation that we are facing with our military. Thank you.
On behalf of Chairman McCain, Senator Hirono, please.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your testimony and for your service and the service of the men and women whom you lead. Over the course of the many hearings that this committee has had with regard to the negative impacts of sequestration, we have been provided with objective information as to those impacts that causes me to, question the article that my colleague just talked about, much as, of course, we appreciate the service of General Petraeus. For General Miller, I've been monitoring the progress with the Marine Corps Pacific laydown, including visits to Okinawa, Guam, and CNMI. And I know that it will be very important to have adequate training facilities. So, General, can you talk briefly about the current status, and if you have any concerns about the progress so far on the Marine Corps Pacific laydown plan? And I just read an article recently about the governor of CNMI and his position regarding training in Pagan.
Well, Senator, we are still in the execution of the current plan of the Pacific laydown for Marine forces. The Fatima replacement facility has been separated from the move from Guam.
Yes.
But from the very beginning, our movement to Guam was contingent and based on the fact that we could train and maintain our readiness once deployed there. And because of actions of others and environmental impact, right now that's potentially at risk and has pushed the timeline to the right. So we're still committed to go to Guam, but to go to Guam we have to be able to sustain the readiness of the force, whatever that force is that we deploy there. So I am concerned with it. I'm watching it. I think there may be some other forces involved in this that's causing delays in this. There's also still issues on Okinawa about the building on to the north of the Fatima replacement facility that are tied up between negotiations between the government of Japan and the prefecture of Okinawa, and we continue to monitor that.
I share your concerns because there are a number of moving parts with regard to the move out of Fatima and Henoko, and there are now delays there. I am very concerned about, I realize that we're doing the buildup necessary for Guam, but we can't send our troops there unless they have a place to train. So CNMI and the discussions that we're having and whatever negotiations we're having with that government is really critical, and I would appreciate your keeping me apprised as we go along, and anything that this committee and I can do to help, we will.
Yes, ma'am, I'll certainly do that.
For General Milley and General Goldfein, I want to commend you in your leadership of your respective services, including the National Guard components in your mission. And as you know, a combined force of active Guard and Reserve components is imperative to the defense of our country. So at our full committee hearing on cybersecurity this week, the important role of the National Guard that the National Guard plays in contributing to total force requirements was discussed. Can you talk about, both of you, talk about progress in other areas where you will be depending on your Guard components to fulfill Army and Air Force requirements?
Senator, I'll give General Milley a break. We're looking across the entire enterprise of the 5 core missions that the Air Force does for the Joint Team in the nation to look at where we can partner with the Air National Guard to leverage that component and the Air Force Reserves across all these mission areas. Cyber, intelligence, command and control, nuclear enterprise, conventional air power in terms of both bomber and fighter force. We're looking at all that. The mobility portion of our business, you go into a C-17 and ask the question in the cockpit today, okay, who's Guard, who's active, who's Reserve, and very often all 3 hands will go up because we are that connected. So, you know, we have 3 components. We have 1 Air Force. We have 5 missions. We're looking across all those mission areas. I predict that that cyber will be a growth industry when it comes to including our Air National Guard because it's ideally suited for that mission set. And so we're looking across the enterprise at ways we can partner and we can increase that.
General Milley.
Thanks, Senator. We've made a lot of strides, I think, in the last year in trying to integrate and enhance the readiness of the National Guard. It's my assessment that we're going to have to significantly improve the readiness of the United States Army National Guard and the Army Reserve. We're the only service that has over 50% of our force structure in the Reserve component. And we've got about 53%. So a significant chunk of the Army is in the Reserve. And as was designed many, many years ago, the bottom line is the United States Army cannot conduct
sustained land campaigns overseas without the National Guard and without the United States Army Reserve. It's not possible. It's the way the system was designed many, many decades ago. So today, what do we rely on? There's a considerable amount of maneuver force in the Army National Guard. We're moving to 26 brigades with this President's budget, maneuver brigades. There's a lot of artillery. So there's a lot of combat power in the National Guard, a lot of attack helicopters and so on. If you look at combat service support, logistics units, about 60%, 62% of the United States Army's logistics is all in the reserve component. So the Army, bottom line, couldn't fight, couldn't feed itself, couldn't maneuver, couldn't conduct any sort of extended land campaign anywhere in the world without the Guard or the Reserve. It's absolutely critical to what we're doing, and we need to increase their readiness as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And gentlemen, I want to thank you for your service. As a matter of fact, there's something I stated to Secretary Carter when he testified last time, where I know a number of us have had a lot of criticisms with some of the Obama administration's foreign policy and national security. But one area where I want to commend the President is the quality and character of the men and women he has been nominating that have become before this committee for confirmation to lead our military. And I think the four of you exemplify that quality and character, and I just want to commend you for that. Part of the reason, and the chairman has already touched on it, is the frank and honest views that you have been given this committee and others since your confirmations and your important positions leading the men and women in uniform of our nation. And I want to commend you on that as well. General Milley, when you were here a couple months ago, you talked about the issue, and you already restated it, of a near-peer, full-spectrum threat in terms of a conflict. If we had to address that, you stated that the U.S. Army would be at high military risk to meet, and you mentioned again, to meet our national security strategy. Do you continue to hold that view? And then I'd like to have each of the other service chiefs here give us your assessment of where your service is in terms of risk. I thought it was remarkable. I thought it was courageous of you to say that. The press didn't pick up on it, but the fact that the Chief of Staff of the Army was saying high military risk is pretty remarkable. And I just want each of the service members, in terms of a full spectrum conflict, the ability to meet that for our nation's security. Where are we in terms of risk for your service?
Thank you, Senator. My assessment remains the same. Just as a reminder, what does it mean? When I'm using that term, I'm talking about the ability to accomplish the military tasks assigned to Army units, the ability to do it on time, and the ability to do that at an acceptable level of cost, expressed in terms of casualties, troops,
right,
killed and wounded. But I maintain my same assessment.
High military risk.
That's correct.
Admiral Richardson.
Sir, I concur with General Milley, and I've sort of forbidden my team to use the word risk because it's become so overused that you start to lose a sense of what that means. But it's exactly as General Milley described. If we get into one of those conflicts, we'll win. It's going to take a lot longer than we'd like. It's going to cost a lot more in terms of dollars and in casualties.
General Neller.
Senator, in short, I agree. We build a force that's been focused on a counterinsurgency fight, and while we've been doing this effectively, our potential adversaries have recapitalized and from ground up build a force that has very significant capability that grows every day. And so we're in the process now of getting ourselves back to where and looking at those capabilities we need to match that up. So would we win? Yes, we would win, but I would associate myself that it would take longer, and I think the cost would be higher.
So you're putting the Marine Corps at high military risk as well?
If we were had to do, based on the contingency plans that were one major contingency and then a near simultaneous of another one at the near simultaneous of a second one, yes.
General Goldfein.
So that's the key for this discussion, which is ready for what? And what we're all, I believe, talking about is if the guidance tells us that we have to be simultaneously ready to defeat a near-peer adversary in an anti-access, anti-area denial environment, a near-peer, while at the same time imposing cost and deterring another adversary, while at the same time ensuring a safe, secure, reliable nuclear enterprise, while at the same time defending the homeland to the level that it will be required, then we're at high risk. But you've got to walk down that line.
Right, but that's what we expect of you. That's your mission. Let me just end by mentioning, we talk a lot about cost. General Milley mentioned it. You know, I know some of you in the Army and in the Marine Corps, the book by T.R. Fehrenbach is still given to our infantry officers to read, This Kind of War. Can you talk a little bit, just when you talk about costs, maybe this is for General Milley and General Neller, when we're sending less ready units into a near-peer fight, we talk about costs. It sounds like dollars and cents. What is it? Relate that to this kind of war. Relate that to the first summer in 1950 in Korea. The costs were dead Americans in the thousands. Isn't that correct?
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, the cost is, the butcher's bill is paid in blood with American soldiers for unready forces. And we have a long history of that. Kasserine Pass, Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Task Force Smith in the Korean War. And it goes all the way back to Bull Run. Lincoln thought he was going to fight a war for 90 days. Wars are often thought to be short when they begin. They're not. They often thought to cost less than they end up costing. And they end up with outcomes and take turns that you never know. It's a dangerous thing. And the best thing I know of is to ensure that you have forces that are sized, trained, manned, equipped, and very, very capable to first prevent the war from starting to begin with. And then once it starts, to win and win fast and win decisively. And that's the most humane thing to do when you're engaged in combat. Otherwise, you're expending lives that I don't think are necessary. In the Korean War, the book you're referring to, in that war, Task Force Smith, 21st Infantry Regiment, was alerted out of Japan, went forward to the peninsula on relatively short notice, and they were essentially decimated. And it wasn't because they were bad. It wasn't because they were incompetent. The battalion commander was an experienced World War II guy. It was because they had, two 90-millimeter recoilless rifles. Their mortars didn't work. Their ammo wasn't done. The training wasn't done. They weren't properly equipped. They weren't in great shape. They were doing occupation duty in Japan. They were sent into combat, into harm's way, unready, and they paid for it. And tens of thousands of others paid for it in those early months, the first 6 months of Korea. It's not a pretty picture. Readiness matters. Reps at training centers matters. Equipment matters. Personnel fill matters. And to do otherwise for us at this table is the ultimate sin, to send someone into combat who's unready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And that's a risk we're facing right now. Senator King.
Thank you. General Milley, I think you've delivered the line of the day for me. The only thing more expensive than deterrence is fighting a war, and the only thing more expensive than fighting a war is losing a war. That sort of summarizes the situation. I'd like to ask a couple of questions of you specifically about Afghanistan and then go on to the more general question. I know the President has modified the troop drawdown schedule in Afghanistan, which I think was an appropriate response to the situation. Were the authorities maintained for the forces that we have there that allow them to act effectively to assist the Afghan forces?
As I understand it, yes. I'm heading over there next month, actually, and I'll see General Nicholson. But with my JCS hat on, as I understand, the operational authorities are adequate to his task. But I'll double-check that, and I can get back with you.
And the second question is related. Are the NATO commitments that have been, in a sense, proportional to ours being maintained?
I believe yes, but let me get you a better answer than that. Let me get you a specific answer.
I'd appreciate it. Thank you. This hearing is focused a lot on money, and I think it's appropriate, and there should be some context. In 1967, defense spending was 8.6% of GDP. In 1991, it was 5.2%. Today, it's 3.3%. And I think often we get, the public and all of us get caught up in these big numbers of 560 billion. But the reality is our commitment to defense has fallen dramatically in the last 45 years. in part because of a perception that the world was getting safer, and in part because of budgetary issues. The other thing I would point out is that net interest on the debt, the national debt today, is more than a third of the military budget, and we're at an all-time low in interest rates. That's going to only go up, which will tend to make the budget be strained even more. I just think we need to be talking to the American people about the fundamental responsibility of any government, which is to keep its people safe, and that the dramatic reduction in the commitment that we've made to defending this country. The follow-up point, of course, which has been made previously, is that since 2011 and the Budget Control Act, we've had Syria, ISIS, South China Sea, Ukraine, the North Korea nuclear development, and cyber. And to maintain a rigid budget structure in the light of those changes, it just seems to me is dumb. And we are trying to protect this country. We have new threats, and it's similar to the discussion we've had, Mr. Chairman, about the troop levels in Afghanistan. We've got to respond to circumstances on the ground. And the circumstances have dramatically changed in the last 5 years in terms of threats that this country faces. And the other point that has been made by Ranking Member Reid, certainty is as important as amount. I think you testified to that. The other way we're not serving the public is by the absolutely ridiculous process around here of not adopting budgets, doing continuing resolutions, getting you the money in the middle of the year, which doesn't allow you to plan, doesn't allow you to do the capital planning and the long-term planning that you need to do. I realize I've talked a long time without a question. I'm going to add one more point. The other piece of this financial burden that we're facing is the nuclear recapitalization, and I've got some slides that I think make this clear, that to me are rather dramatic. And what we're facing is a very large bulge, if you will, in the commitment, and if we don't make some additional overall way of dealing with that issue, it's going to eat up everything else. We're not going to be able to maintain aircraft or develop the ships that we need, because all the money's going to go into that. And I just point this out. It's been 40 years since there's been a recapitalization, and we're heading into we've got to have some special way of accounting for this, it seems to me. And it doesn't mean borrow for it, but it does mean fund it in some way. Otherwise, it will crowd out the necessity of modernization across the rest of the enterprise. If you can find a question in there, gentlemen, you're welcome to it. Admiral?
Sir, I'll jump on that because between General Goldfein and I, and we're lockstep on trying to solve this problem in every way we can. I think that bulge talks to a number of the points that you made. One, as General Milley said, it's much cheaper to deter a war, and this is what this program is all about. This is about deterrence.
And it's a theory that has worked for us for 80 years.
It's been absolutely effective for 80 years. Not only nuclear war, of course, but also conflict worldwide. If you look at sort of before and after. It's a startling difference. The other point is that each of these recapitalizations, the first one in the 60s, then in the 80s, and then now, we're getting that mission done for less. Each of those peaks is subsequently smaller.
Right.
And then to your point, we can get that peak even smaller if we have predictable funding in place. We're going to recapitalize the undersea leg with 12 submarines. If we get that to predictable funding to buy that package in a block, we could get those 12 submarines probably for the cost of 10 or 11. And so you can see real savings that comes through this predictability. But I want to go back to my first point. Absolutely essential that we get this done because without that deterrent effect, we think things are bad now. It would be much worse.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you all for your service and for your outstanding testimony here today. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let's see if we can summarize here. All of you agree that a long-term CR is bad for the military.
Sir.
Yes.
So when I hear my House colleagues wishing for a long-term CR, you don't wish for that?
No.
No.
Okay. To my House colleagues, the OCO account, you all have a problem with what they're doing? Taking OCO money to fund the military?
Sir, I'll tell you that our preference is a stable long-term budget that we can plan on.
Do you think OCO funding is not stable?
It's one-year funding, so it doesn't give us the long-term
Do
stability.
you agree? Does everybody agree with that? Yes. You'd prefer not to go that route?
Yes.
So why do they do this? They don't want to bust the caps. They don't want to take on the right and tell them y'all are crazy. You know, this sequestration's not working. Have y'all talked to the president about this? Have you told the president what you're telling us about the state of the military under sequestration? Have you had a conversation with the Commander-in-Chief telling him what you just told us, General Miley?
I have not personally had a conversation with the President on
What about the Navy?
No, sir, not personally.
What about the
this
Marines?
topic.
No, sir, not personally.
What about the Air Force?
No, sir.
What are you doing at the White House, Mr. President? You're threatening to veto a bill that would increase defense spending because it doesn't have non-defense increases. I'll make some suggestions to you. Go tell the president what you're telling us. I absolutely see the flaws in what the House is doing. I can't believe the Commander-in-Chief is sitting on the sidelines and watch this happen, taking a laissez-faire attitude that if you send me a bill that increases defense spending without increasing non-defense spending, I will veto it. I find that as repugnant as what the House is doing. Okay. By the end of 2021, we'll be spending what percent of GDP on defense if sequestration is fully implemented? Does anybody know? 2.3%. Check the math. Senator King made a very good point. Do you see by the end of 2021, given the threats that we face as a nation, it's wise to cut defense spending in half in terms of historical numbers?
No, sir.
Do you, General?
No, sir, I do not.
No, sir.
No, sir.
Well, somebody should ask, how could your Congress and your president allow that to happen? I ask that all the time. I don't have a really good answer. If sequestration goes back to effect in 2017, are we putting people's lives at risk because of the effects of sequestration in terms of training?
Yes, sir.
Potentially, yes, sir.
Well, does anybody else listen to these hearings but us? How do you live with yourself? And I say that I include me. I'm part of this body. I'm voted against sequestration, but that's no excuse. If you want to do revenue to fix it, I'll do revenue. But what I'm not going to do is keep playing this silly game. When you rank threats to our military from nation states and terrorists, would you say sequestration is a threat to our military?
Yes, sir. Sure.
Would you agree with me, General, that the Congress is going to shoot down more planes than any enemy that we can think of in the near term?
Potentially.
Do you agree with me that we're going to park more Marines and take them out of the fight than any enemy we can think of in the near term here, General? Sequestration.
Sir, nobody's going to park us. We're going to go fight, but we will be at risk.
Okay, so what's your budget in terms of personnel cost?
We pay about 61% of the green TOA for personnel.
So let's just walk through that real quickly. 60% of your budget's personnel.
Yes, sir.
If sequestration goes into effect, are you going to lose Marines?
Yes, sir, we will.
Okay, so they'll be out of the fight. How many ships will the Navy have if sequestration's fully implemented, Admiral?
Sir, hard to say, but fewer than the 380.
They say 278. Is that about right?
That's in the ballpark.
So the Congress is going to sink how many ships?
So might take you on the word sink, but it'll be
okay, well, whatever. They're
30,
not going to be there.
30.
So how many brigades are we going to wipe out, General, in the Army?
Our estimation is we'll lose another between 60 and 100,000 troops if sequestration comes out. And
would you agree with me when you rank the threats to the military, you'd have to put Congress and the President in that mix if we don't fix sequestration?
I won't judge either Congress.
I'll withdraw the question.
You're not required.
I will not judge
Not required to
Congress,
answer that question.
Right. I'm not judging the President or Congress. I will abstain.
Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I remind the witnesses there are certain questions that you are not required to answer.
I was about to say that I was going to re-ask that question, but it would probably reach the same result. I just want to say how much I respect your service, and I think we all do, regardless of the demanding and tough questions that have been asked. We approach this as a collegial effort, working together with men and women who have devoted their lives to the service of our nation with extraordinary distinction and bravery. That goes for you and all who serve with you. And I just want to begin with my profound thanks for your service. Admiral, I want to talk a little bit about submarines. I know that we are moving toward building 2 submarines a year, Virginia class. In your testimony, you briefly note your concern for the future shortfall in our attack submarines. What is the Navy's strategy to deal with that shortfall when the desired 48-boat minimum in 2025 reaches a low point in 2029 of 41, potentially placing our nation in jeopardy? Do we have a strategy to address that shortfall?
Sure, we do. First, that shortfall highlights sort of a fundamental element of shipbuilding plans, which is that you've got to think long-term. And some of these things are very difficult to correct in the short term. It just takes time to build submarines and their capital investments as well. But we are building 2 per year. We're going to continue to do that. And we're also going to look to every possible way to extend the life of the current Los Angeles class submarines that are carrying much of the burden today so that we can fill in that trough as much as possible. We're examining the feasibility of we are building 2 Virginia class submarines a year. We're going to examine continuing that as we bring the Ohio replacement program online, particularly in the year 2021. And if you put that submarine in place, it actually starts to fill in, a good percentage of that trough. And so then we'll look forward to more creative deployment options so that we get more out of every submarine. Use all of these methods together to try and minimize the effect of that trough, but we're not going to be able to erase it.
Your point about the importance of planning, I think, is profoundly important, little understood by the American people, who often think we can snap our fingers and turn on the spigot for submarines, but we know, and so do the dedicated men and women at Electric Boat in Groton, that planning also requires investment in skill training and the defense industrial base that consists of those men and women who in many ways are as vital as the men and women in uniform, because they build the platforms, the submarines, who make our projection of power possible around the world. Would you agree?
I would completely agree. And in terms of their talent and the skill level, I wish we could take every American through that facility up at Electric Boat, and the same down in all of our shipbuilding facilities, just to see what America can do when it puts its mind to it. It's stunning. But as we ramp up to build Ohio replacement, the biggest challenge is the workforce and bringing those skilled laborers on. And so I agree with you 100%. It is a team effort, and it's a tough job.
Well, I hope you'll come back. I've been privileged to go through Electric Boat with you. I know Senator Reid has on many occasions as well. And this investment, it's not spending, it's investment in our future, I think is really vital. Likewise, General Milley, on the Blackhawks, as you know, the National Commission on the Future of the Army issued aviation recommendations earlier this year, and these recommendations create some budgetary tension with the aviation restructure initiative the Army proposed in 2014. I'm concerned that the planned UH-60 Black Hawk procurement, which is a vital modernization initiative for the active Army and National Guard across the nation, will be reduced to pay for other programs as you move forward with the Army Aviation fiscal year 18-22 budget. Are revisions being made to assure that future aviation modernization plans will be sustained in light of the Commission's recommendation?
Aviation is one of our top priorities. It's one of the ones I mentioned in my own opening statement, Senator, and absolutely we're committed to improving the modernization, and we've got several initiatives underway. With respect to the National Commission, we have put some of the aviation requirements into the UFR, into the unfinanced requirement list. Others were funding. So we think the Commission did great work, and we intend to implement their recommendation to the extent we can.
Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Gentlemen, thank you for being here today. It is a privilege to be in the same room with you. We do have a lot of difficulties coming up, especially with sequestration, and I don't think I can be any more eloquent than Senator Graham. Admiral, I'd like to start with you. I do understand the Navy is facing some significant budgetary challenges, and this is true of all of our services. However, I was able to visit one of your ships earlier this year, and I was stunned to learn about the requirement for up-to-date paper charts aboard U.S. Navy ships and the low priority of celestial training. And I did send a letter to the Navy on this topic about 2 months ago, as of yesterday, and I'm still waiting for a written response. But what I'd like to know from you, what steps are you taking to increase basic nautical and celestial navigation training for your sailors and remove dependency from electronic devices? The way I understand it, they do use an off-the-shelf product that other civilian navigators use, as well as a program that's specific to the Navy. They just don't get those up-to-date downloads. So, and they don't have the paper charts necessary. Maybe you can fill me in a little bit.
Right. Well, with respect to navigation, it's something that obviously we take very seriously, both in every moment that we're underway and looking into the future. With respect to minimizing our vulnerability to electronic navigation, global positioning system, and those sorts of systems. Really a multifaceted approach. We have started teaching celestial navigation, and so those types of courses are back in the curriculum at the Naval Academy and other places. We can use technology to move us beyond the sextant in terms of proficiency and accuracy there. And then one of the things that I am working hard with our industrial-based partners is there are other ways to get precision navigation and timing into our systems, which is so critical not only for navigation but also for weapon system performance and everything across the board. And so that's an area of emphasis as well. And these would be systems that would be independent of GPS and potentially more precise than GPS. And so we're working very hard across the full spectrum.
Okay, that's very encouraging. We can't forget that we need to stay a little bit old school in some manners.
Got to stay in the channel, ma'am.
That's right.
Sure, yep.
Outstanding. Thanks, Admiral. I appreciate that. General Goldfein, I recently did have the opportunity to visit one of my Iowa Air National Guard units, 185th Air Refueling Wing, in Sioux City. And one of the things I noticed was the pilot shortage. They continue to talk about that. I know the chairman has already addressed this issue. But what I'd like to maybe know from you is there a solution for the Guard and Reserve Force as well? What can we do to better enable them with their pilot shortage?
Ma'am, actually, it's a very similar solution to what we look at in the active duty, because the motivations are the same. And the same pilot who joins, because very often, as you know, a lot of the Air National Guard actually came from the active duty. So the important part for us is to ensure that they are getting the same opportunities to train in the Air National Guard as they have in the active duty. And like General Milley said for the Army, the Air Force is structured in a way as well that we could not do the job that we're required to do without the Air National Guard, the Air Force Reserves, and the active component all working together. And especially in the mobility community is where we are actually the most connected in terms of these associations and how we get together to get the mission done. So actually what I mentioned in terms of quality service, making sure that they have the hours to fly, that they have the resources they need to be able to be competitive. At the same time, we also provide the financial incentives they need to stay. All those come together that's going to improve our retention rates, and we're fully committed to that.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And just very briefly, in March, the Army announced a new associated units pilot program partnering National Guard and Reserve components with an active brigade combat team. And my understanding is that this could greatly increase the readiness of our reserve forces and reduce costs. General Milley, do you have any updates on how this program is working so far? And again, sir, very briefly, please.
Yeah, we've got 14 associated units right now in the pilot program. We do think and hope that it will increase the readiness of the Guard along with increased CTC rotations and increased requests for man days. And in combination, all of those things will help increase the readiness of the National Guard.
Outstanding. We love our Guard folks, don't we?
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And General Goldfein, thank you for being here. I noted I was here for your opening comments. I had 2 concurrent committee meetings I had to run to, but you said something I think it made me reflect on the 440th, and I'm not gonna focus on it except to say you were saying you need the flexibility to get to shed excess infrastructure if you're going to meet some of your if you're going to address some of your budget constraints. I think the 440th was a classic example of that because I know very well that there were at least 5 or 6 other sites that were either statutorily protected or protected by BRAC that, in your opinion, would have been a better, more appropriate way to get to the target that you were hitting. So I understand the pressure you're under. And hopefully we'll repeal sequestration, but if we don't, we need to find some other ways to provide you with flexibility to weather this storm. I have one question for you, and it really has to do with the NDAA from FY16, which has, I think, a requirement to retain 1,900 aircraft. How are you going to comply with that requirement, or can you?
Sir, actually, in this FIDEP, we will comply with that. The next FIDEP afterward is going to be a challenge. Because as we bring on new weapon systems, given all the other challenges we face, being able to maintain the 1,900 is going to be a challenge as we also increase investment in some other key areas that the nation requires.
I'm not sure I see how you do it. So we should probably, outside of this committee hearing, talk about shedding light on that versus put a requirement in there that I don't think you're going to be able to achieve. To the comment on General Neller, I've spent a fair amount of time down in North Carolina at Cherry Point, and I've had a number of discussions up here, and I continue to hear about challenges facing readiness for your aircraft, and then you have the second, third order effects on challenges for pilot flying time, training time. How would you assess the current state of readiness, and give me an idea what the trend lines look like?
The current state of readiness for marine aviation is dependent upon what model type series, but in the aggregate, it's improving, but it's not where we need it to be. It's below an acceptable level. We're not flying enough. We don't have enough ready basic aircraft, and that means the aircraft that we fly get turned faster, and so they're harder to maintain. We're right at, and we're at our flight hour program because not that we're flying a lot of hours, but that's also where we get our parts. So we're not where we want to be. I don't think we're going to be where we want to be, assuming consistent, stable funding. And if we can increase the parts support funding, it'll happen faster. If we can get new airplanes sooner, it'll happen faster. But the trend line is up, slightly up.
I'll tell you one thing I saw down at Cherry Point, that where you really, the rubber hits the road and you're down there and you see these repair operations, and the way that it works, they can go so far with certain repairs, and then they're either waiting for parts or they're relying on some other part of the supply chain to finish the repair. So we got planes that could probably be ready to go, but for changes in some of the processes and other things that we may need to do to provide you with the flexibility or the funding to do it. And I know that has to do with funding in some of the accounts that have been depleted over time. So we've got to shed light on that as we go into planning for next year. And General Milley, you made a comment about we're mortgaging our future readiness to be ready today. I mean, we're creating a debt. Would you mind getting into specific examples of what that looks like?
Well, specifically with respect to the budget, we've, over many, many years now, have undercut or reduced our S&T and R&D parts in the modernization accounts. That part of the budget, that part of the pie, has been reduced over time. That's the part of the pie that is future readiness, because 10 years from now, 15 years from now, those R&D projects, those S&T projects, they become real weapons or real equipment. That's what I'm talking about. So that part of the pie has been reduced. We are trying to, in this president's budget, make some hard choices as a service, given a top line and given basically a fixed amount on the compensation piece of it, to try to balance the readiness today versus modernization, S&T, and infrastructure readiness, et cetera, for tomorrow. These are hard, tough choices. And in the Army's piece of it, we are preferencing, we are biasing today's readiness because of the gaps from the last 15 years. We've got to get them back up to speed because of the threats we've all been talking about. So.
Well, thank you all for your service, and I thank Senator McCain for opening his question about your position on the deleterious effects that sequestration is going to continue to have. If we take nothing away from this, we have to be unified and end this ridiculous way to budget and protect our nation. Thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here. In 2014, the Jacob Sexton Military Suicide Prevention Act was signed into law through the FY15 NDAA. It was the first bill I introduced after joining the Senate, and it's named after a Hoosier soldier we lost to suicide in 2009. Last year was the fourth straight year we lost more service members to suicide than to combat. My colleague, Senator King, is sponsoring a showing of a movie, Thank You for Your Service, which touches upon this very subject. And when we talk about taking care of our troops, when we talk about readiness, when we talk about maintaining the strongest fighting force the world has ever known, I can't think of anything more fundamental than ensuring the physical and mental health of our men and women in uniform. The Sexton Act mandated that each of the services provide a robust mental health assessment to every service member, active or guard or reserve, every year. And I'd like to know how each of your branches are doing in implementing this requirement. General Milley, if you could touch on that.
Thank you, Senator. One thing within the Army, we are seeing in the last year an improvement, meaning a reduced number of suicides, slight, but significant enough to be noticeable across the force, and that's important. So all the efforts that we've done with your help and Congress help and lots of folks' help over the last several years we think are showing leading indicators of improvement in suicide, which we recognize is a component of readiness because it's a tragic event. Specific to your question, we are implementing through MedCom annual mental health assessments for the force in the regular Army. I'd have to check on the Guard Reserve and on how that's being done, but we are doing that throughout the force. And we also do routine post-deployment health assessments. So if you go to Iraq, Afghanistan, come back, we do TBI checks. So we've got a lot of programs right now throughout the force to focus on the very thing that you're talking about. We're taking it serious, and we think we're making some improvement.
Thank you. Admiral Richardson and General Neller, I know you're a team in many ways on this. If you could touch upon it.
Sir, exactly the same commitment. We're on track to implement that completely in compliance with your intent. We share your deep commitment to the mental health of our sailors. With respect to the other measures to prevent, we find that the more that we can make our sailors feel like a member of a team, that they've got a network of support that they can fall back on, that seems to be one of the most effective things. And so that, in combination with an assessment, we hope to turn this thing downward.
Thank you. General Neller.
According to the senior medical officer, who's a Navy admiral that is for the Marine Corps, we're in the process of implementation. He estimates on the active side by the end of FY17 it will be implemented. The reserve will probably take longer just because of the nature of their drilling on weekends and having access But as far as filling out the questionnaire online and then having a care provider contact them and have a conversation and all the intentions of the legislation and the law, we are planning on being fully implemented by the end of FY17, Senator.
Thank you so much. General Goldfein.
Sir, I'll just say the same. We're in the same boat, and we'll be fully implemented by about the mid part of FY17. But I will also add we're taking a little bit different approach too as well. It's fairly new. We're actually taking the SOCOM approach that they've approached it when they take a look at, and their approach is, you know, if we would take an aircraft off the schedule at a certain periodic time to do periodic maintenance, and then take an aircraft off the schedule at a longer periods of time to do depot maintenance and make sure they're in good shape and put them back in the fight, why wouldn't we do the same thing for airmen? So we're actually looking at taking your initiative to the next level, which is a periodic maintenance schedule for the human to increase performance. That takes the stigma off, because if you're having to go in based on a schedule and everybody's having to do it, we think it'll have profound effects.
Okay. Admiral Richardson, you were kind enough to visit Crane Naval Base, and it's integral to several modernization efforts we have going, most prominently the Ohio Replacement Program. How does our pattern of reliance on continuing resolutions impact your ability to modernize the Navy?
Sir, I think that we all sort of feel this pain in some way or another. This continuing resolution business really undercuts the trust and confidence that we have with our suppliers, with the industrial base that are so key to providing, you know, not only at the ship level, particularly in the strategic deterrent business, but also down at the component level. And when you disrupt that trust and confidence, when you double the amount of contracts that you have to write just to get through the year, when you prevent the ability to buy things in blocks over a long period of time, the only thing you're doing is increasing cost, increasing time, and that translates to increasing risk to our warfighter.
Thank you all for your hard work and dedication. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Manchin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank all of you for your service and for being here today. The one question I wanted to ask, and I know it's been battered around quite a bit, but the United States Air Force, I'll start, General Goldfein, with you, but it's really for all of you. Standing tradition of leadership and coalition building, which you all do, and it's evident today in a significant role in the 20-nation air coalition aligned against ISIL, which you all have done quite effectively. As you may know, only 4 of our fellow NATO coalition members spend at least 2% of their GDP on defense spending. And the target for NATO countries, there's 28, and it should be at 2%. There's only 5, including the U.S. That leaves 23 that doesn't seem to care or make any attempt whatsoever. I can't figure why that condition was even put in if it was not intended to be kept or met. So I think I'd just like to hear your all's assessment of this and what effect it's having. And I know there's been some wild political statements made about what would be done, but I don't subscribe to any of that. But I'm thinking, why do we still have that condition if we're not going to force anyone, or there's no retribution if you don't? And how is it affecting, I think, sir, is what I would ask.
So I'll just tell you, I know that the Secretary has been over there and talking to NATO significantly about their contribution and increasing their investment in defense, and that was certainly something I think all of us at the table would want to see, not only in the air domain, but in all the domains. One of the areas that we're focused on in the Air Force specifically over the next several years is coalition-friendly command and control, because the information age of warfare is more about data sharing, it's more about information sharing, and it's more about being able to connect into a common network and architecture. And technology has increased security over time and has actually made that harder. And so as we partner with not only our NATO allies, but other allies and partners around the globe, being able to have them connect into a common framework, a common network, share information, and be able to fight as a coalition is going to become more important in the future, not less.
Well, I know that, but I'm just saying is how much of a strain does that put? We know with our challenges we have financially and everybody else's challenges around the world. But if they're basically able to just neglect that, thinking we're going to do all the heavy lifting, which we've done, and I understand, but also come up with the financial wherewithals to do it too, is there anything that we could do that kind of, do you see any movement in a positive direction? I mean, I understand Germany kind of takes the lead on this, and the rest of them follow with Germany, and if Germany doesn't take it serious, it's not going to happen.
So one area that'd be very helpful, I think, and we've had this conversation. I know I do it as an air chief, as a global air chief, and my partners here do as well. And that is, we call something, high demand, low density.
Yeah.
And then we tend to admire it over time. And we do the best we can to be able to increase the density or decrease the demand, but that doesn't often happen. It would be very helpful if our NATO partners and others could actually contribute in those key mission areas and enablers, which would raise the bar for everyone as opposed to sometimes what they choose to invest in.
Would anybody else have any comments?
Senator, I would just add that first, this isn't a new problem. I was a NATO officer in the 90s, and after the end of the Cold War, they took the peace dividend and they haven't reinvested. Second, our military counterparts, they want to participate and they want to play, and they play within their capability, and I think we need to provide them opportunities to do that, whatever their percentage of GDP is for investment. And lastly, I think it is changing. I think it is changing. I think the world environment and the strategic environment you see, particularly in Europe, is causing them to recognize that they have underinvested, particularly if the Eastern European countries are going to the point. So I think there will be some change. I think we should encourage them. I think if there's foreign military sales, that we should facilitate their purchase of U.S. equipment, which is increase our interoperability, and then whatever way, whether it's FMS or their own money, we encourage them to increase their capability.
So I'll just add on to that. First, just like General Miller said, my counterparts in NATO, they're as frustrated as anybody about this. They want to be full participants in securing not only their nation, but Europe, and contributing to global security and stability. And to that end, again, the importance of American leadership to provide an example, be there, is another thing that they comment on consistently. And so, as a team, whether it's equipment interoperability, command and control, they want to participate, and they're as frustrated with these policy decisions as anybody.
General.
As you know, Senator, we've had a long history in Europe with the Army. We've still got 30,000 troops over there doing a lot of exercises. We're putting out APS systems, et cetera. But with respect to the NATO partner, spending, et cetera, what I've read is that their defense spending is actually increasing with many of these countries lately, perhaps not at 2% yet, but Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Poland, even Germany, Sweden, Finland, Norway, these countries, to include the UK recently, they're reversing some of these trends because of what they've seen in the Ukraine and Crimea and elsewhere. So they are investing and they are expanding. The key now is interoperability and work as a team. NATO is a critical alliance. There's been a long peace in Europe since 1945, so going on 7 decades. Part of that is because of nuclear weapons, but also because 300,000 soldiers stood on a wall up until 1989-90, but also because of those European allies all shoulder to shoulder facing down the Soviet Union. So that alliance is key, it's critical, and I think it's mutually interdependent between us and them in order to achieve effect on any kind of future battlefield.
I would just finally wrap up real quick. If this is one of the conditions that the members, NATO member nations had when they formed NATO, how many other conditions are not being met? That there's no enforcement, no policing, there's no retribution. I mean, it just seems that if you're not going to do anything, why do we have it there? And they're going to say, don't worry about that. The Americans will pick it up. They'll pay. You understand, we go to our constituents, it's pretty hard to explain why is it there. If you're not going to make them do something, if there's no retribution, I'm not saying we're not going to help, not going to defend, but maybe, World Bank, interest rates, things of this sort that gives them privileges being a NATO member, that there might be a little bit of a penalty, it might give them a little bit of a push. I'm understanding it's not from the military, it must be coming from the policymakers and state departments. But thank you all again for your service. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. On behalf of Chairman McCain, Senator Wicker, please.
Thank you, sir. For General Miller, on April 6th, Secretary Stackley testified that the required number of amphibious ships necessary to provide the lift of 2 Marine Expeditionary Brigades to conduct joint forcible entry operations is 38 ships. That number, but he also said that number is fiscally constrained to 34 ships with an operational availability of 90%. We often hear about combatant commander requirements concerning amphibious ships. General, you're the man who provides the Marines who operate off those ships. What's the right number, in your opinion, and what mix of ships should that include, sir?
Well, Senator, you're correct. The combatant commanders, if we could meet all the requirements, it would take 50 ships. The fiscally constrained requirement is 38 with a 90% availability. Right now, we're at 31. We're going to go to 34 by 2022, and by
we'll get to 34.
We'll get to 34 by 20.
Where would that leave us? What will that not permit us to do, sir?
It will not give us, based on the average availability, the ability to embark 2 Marine Expeditionary Brigades, which is the minimum requirement for forcible entry. So ultimately, we will get to 38, but it will be beyond multiple fit-ups, I believe 33, and then it'll start to go down if we don't sustain it. So what's the right mix? The right mix is ideally minimum of 12 big deck amphibs that can handle F-35 and Osprey, 12 LPD-17 class, and then 12 other comparable hull forms, either an LPD-17 repeat or what we're calling the LXR, which uses the LPD-17 hull form as its base.
That's only 36.
You've also got 2 LHARs and other ships that would get you to 38. So we have 2 non-well-decked big deck ships, which would actually get you 14 big decks.
Between the LPD-28 and the LXR, can you get more ship at less cost if the schedule is accelerated?
Well, first, Senator, thank to the Congress for giving us the 12th LPD, but absolutely, it's similar to what the CNO said about submarines. Anything that we block by and that we can give the shipyard, whatever shipyard it is, certainty where they can get the workforce, they can train the workforce, and they can learn as they build the ships. They can build these ships faster for less money. So if we were to block by 5 LPD-17 replacements or LXR, we could probably get 3.5 ships for the cost of 5. But that's a big number, but that would be, and I know Mr. Stackley would agree with that, and it goes with any type of ship or any type of platform, whether it's an airplane. The more we can provide certainty to both, not just to the primary vendor, but all the subs that build the parts, we can drive the cost down, and the workforce gets better, they get smarter, they get faster.
Thank you, sir. General Milley, about Afghanistan. My understanding of our goal in Afghanistan is to participate in a sustained partnership with the elected leadership there. And I would observe that we've had a sustained partnership for decades with our friends in Europe and a successful sustained partnership in Korea, although there's not much kinetic warfare going on in Korea at this point. We're there, we've had a sustained partnership, and I think it's been successful for the people there and for Americans also. What is the understanding, in your opinion, of the Afghan people about our purpose in being there and our long-term relationship?
Senator, thanks. And as you know, I've got a fair amount of time in Afghanistan. In general, the Afghan people are very supportive of the United States military being there, and they would be fearful of us withdrawing, completely, at least in the near term. So what we are trying to do is working by, with, and through the Afghan security forces who have been built up to a significant size now. What we're trying to do is train, advise, assist them in order to maintain stability against their enemy, their internal enemies, so that the government and the other elements of the campaign plan, the economy and rule of law, et cetera, can be sustained over time. I think that's going to take a considerable length of time. The attitude of the Afghan people is that they, at least from my experiences, they would prefer that we continue to stick with them. And I think that's our plan, our current U.S. government plan, and I think that's also the NATO plan, is to continue to sustain that effort.
I, for one, concur in your conclusion there, sir. Is it unsettling to the Afghan people when they hear that we might leave early?
I would say yes, but I think that we, the United States and NATO, have been very firm in our commitment now, and we have said what we're going to have and going forward. And I think that the government, the military, and the people understand that message, that we're not going to abandon Afghanistan.
Mr. Ranking Member, I understand we've had some discussion about sequestration, but my understanding is no one has asked these panelists if they are designing a FIDIP that reflects the return to sequestration. I realize I'm a bit over my time, but I think it would be important for us to hear, and I know they are horrified at the thought of sequestration returning, but if each of you could tell us, are you designing a future year defense plan to reflect going back to sequestration? General Goldfein?
So we're not.
You're not?
We're not.
But you're aware it's the law of the land.
Yes, sir, we absolutely are.
Well, okay, General Neller.
Sir, we're not designing one, but we have had discussions about what might be the consequences and some actions we could possibly have to take if it went into effect.
And Admiral Richardson?
So I'd say our design is based on providing the security that the Americans expect of the United States Navy, but we've always got to start that conversation with these sequestration levels, which puts us in a terrific bind and able to meet that mission.
So no FIDIP, though, that actually reflects the draconian things that you would have to implement?
No, sir, we'd have to adapt.
And finally, General Milley.
We've done some preliminary planning, Senator, and so I understand what the order of magnitude actions that would have to take place in the event of full sequestration. However, we know we have not developed a POM or a FIDIP to that level of detail that would be submitted to the President and to Congress.
Well, I certainly hope we can avoid it, but as I said years ago, Senator Reid, it's the law of the land, and it surprised us all last time when we got to that point and it actually went into effect. Hope we can avoid it, and thank you all for your service.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the Chairman, Senator Shaheen, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all very much for being here and for your service to our country. And I apologize, I had 2 other hearings this morning, so I'm sorry that I missed much of the discussion. And I'm sure you may have already answered this question, but I think it's important to ask again. As I have traveled around the month of August, when we were not here in Washington and met with businesses, one of the things I consistently heard from many of our businesses in New Hampshire, and we have a significant number that that have contracts with the Department of Defense that provide equipment and technology to our military, was concern about 2 things. One was about the budgeting process and about the fact that we're going in again with no budget for the upcoming year and a short-term continuing resolution. Hopefully we will have a longer-term budget after the election. And the other was about the reduced investment in research and development. And so can I ask you to speak to what the impact is, not just of your budgets in the military, but also of the industrial base that supports our military that we need to maintain if we're to keep our technological edge? And General Goldfein, I see you nodding, so maybe you could begin.
Yes, ma'am. You know, the impact to industry when we can't provide some stable budget and projection for them probably hits them the hardest in their technical workforce. So what I see as a rather technical force is when I'm talking to a company that's building, for instance, let's just say an air-to-air or an exquisite air-to-ground missile or munition, they've got to keep a certain amount of that workforce engaged over time And so then when I go to them with one-year budgets and tell them my procurement quantities now are going to be here, and then the next year, because of trades, they're going to be down here, and I go jack them around back and forth, it causes an incredible challenge for industry to be able to sustain their workforce that we need. And that doesn't even go into at what point do I go to them and say, because of the global security environment, I need you to surge and build even more capability and produce more weapons over the period of time. And what they tell me is, hey, we got rid of that workforce because you told me that you were coming down this year. So everything that we deal with in terms of an unstable budget and one-year budgets actually gets accelerated into industry as well.
And you alluded to the impact that has on our national security and our ability to be prepared, but can I get you to elaborate a little more on that?
Well, ma'am, it goes to what kind of weapon systems that we need to modernize. So for the Air Force, like all the services, we've got aircraft that have already exceeded their service life or at the end of their service life, and they've got to be replaced. And so we rely on industry to be able to support us with our acquisition programs going forward. If we don't have stable budgets, if we don't have the research and development dollars to be able to develop that technology for the future, then what happens to us is we continue to push that to the right. And like General Milley said, you start mortgaging the future to pay for the current readiness and the fights you have. And the other challenge you have is as the aircraft age over time, they actually become more and more expensive to fly. And so you take even more of those dollars that you need for research, development, and modernization, and you shift them left into sustainment of older weapon systems. This all adds up to an increased risk.
Thank you.
Ma'am, if I could pile on to that just
Please.
a bit, in support of my fellow chief. This is really a team effort, and this message of stability is critical because it's not just government R&D, but those businesses that you visited, they're investing their own dollars in IRAD, and they need to know if they're going to get anything back on that investment. And when we don't give them that signal of stability and confidence, they're simply not going to invest. They're going to cash out, and they're going to be out of the business. The other thing is that particularly with technology changing so quickly today, and Senator Reid highlighted it in his opening statement, that what used to be long-term future, that's becoming a more short-term future. And so we're not talking decades into the future anymore. We're talking single digits of years because things are moving so fast in directed energy, additive manufacturing, electromagnetic maneuver warfare, artificial intelligence, technologies. We've got to keep on the step with this because we are not the only team out there looking to capture these capabilities.
Thank you. Well, hopefully that's an admonition to Congress that we get our act together and produce a budget and some certainty for the long term. Mr. Chairman, could I ask one more question?
Senator King will have one, too, if he'll let him. So you go first.
Okay. I know this is on budget, but I just came from a hearing in the Foreign Relations Committee on Afghanistan, and I heard Senator Wicker asking about Afghanistan. And I wanted to ask you all about the special immigrant visa program for the Afghans, because as I'm sure you're aware, it's about to expire, and Congress so far has declined to extend that program, and therefore we have several thousand Afghans in the pipeline who it's questionable whether they will get visas, and many of them are under immediate threat or their families are being threatened. So can I ask you to speak to the importance of that program to our men and women on the ground and why it would be important for Congress to extend it? General Milley, do you want to start?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. We've had, lots, hundreds, thousands of Afghans work for us, the United States military, since 9/11, since we went in 2001. They've been interpreters, they've been analysts, they've been doing a lot of things. Many of them have asked to become American citizens and get visas, etc. So I personally would be in favor of extending that because those are brave men and women who have fought along our side. And there are men and women, American men and women in uniform that are alive today because a lot of those Afghans were putting their life in their line for their own country, to be sure, but with us. And now they want to become American citizens, and I, for one, would like to afford them that opportunity.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to add? General Neller?
Yes, Senator, we saw a similar thing in Iraq, and the very same thing that General Milley described, where they're out there shoulder to shoulder with Marine soldiers, sailors, airmen, risking their lives and sharing the risk and providing great services to keep our citizens alive, our folks alive. And I used to interview them myself and make sure they understood that this is not what you might have seen on TV, but you're going to come here, you're going to work because you have an opportunity. So I think there's a proper vetting process. I know commanders up to the rank of flag and general officers are involved in this. I signed off on all of these myself, and I know there's background checks, and I fully support with the proper vetting process that this program be allowed to continue.
Thank you all very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
On behalf of the Chair, McCain, Senator King, please.
Just briefly, Senator, one of the privileges of serving on this committee is the relationship that we have with our services, and one of those relationships is the military fellows that are assigned to our offices. Today marks probably the last hearing for Lieutenant Commander Dennis Wishmeyer, naval officer who has served in my office for this year, and I just want to recognize the importance of that program, recognize the work that Lieutenant Commander Wishmeyer has made. If I've asked good questions, they've been his. If I've asked stupid questions, they're mine. And I just wanted to provide that recognition. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
He must have been here today, Senator King. No. On behalf of Chairman McCain, let me thank you, gentlemen, for your testimony, forthright and very sobering. Thank you for your service individually, and please extend our thanks and gratitude to the men and women that you lead so proudly. With that, I would adjourn the hearing. Thank you.